Symbiosis is a scary word when it comes to AI.
It's optional. Humans are the, original gangster neural net.
Hey, this is Warren Redlick. Elon Musk talked with Joe Rogan the other day in a great interview. The biggest subject in that interview was Neuralink. And I want to just give an introduction to this is what Neuralink is. This is why it matters. This is how it's going to change your life, your parents' lives, your friend. This is going to change the world. It's going to be amazing, scary maybe, but amazing. I can't wait to see how far this goes. This is going to be fun. I've been wanting to make a Neuralink video, and now is the time. Let's get going. Are you ready?
Boring Company does not take, it's like less than 1% of brain cycles, and then there's Neuralink, which is, I don't know, maybe it's like 5%.
Early in the interview with Rogan, Elon says that he devotes less than 1% of his brain cycles to the Boring Company. This really surprised me. The Boring Company has been a big project that I thought Elon was putting a lot into. They had that big event with the tunnel in Hawthorne. The Boring Company is doing a tunnel project in Las Vegas right now. It seemed like this was a big deal. Elon talked about soul-crushing traffic and how Boring Company was going to solve that problem. So I thought this was big. For Elon to say he's putting less than 1% of his brain cycles, his attention, into the Boring Company suggests that something's wrong. We were expecting the same kind of fast, iterative development that we see with Starship and that we see with Tesla. We were expecting that kind of development to happen with the Boring Company boring machines. It started with Godot, that's the original boring machine they were using. It was supposed to move on to a boring machine called Linestorm. And then after Linestorm, we were already supposed to now be working with a boring machine called Prufrock. And Prufrock was supposed to have 15 times the tunneling speed of existing boring machines. And this was going to enable so many developments with the Boring Company. Networks of tunnels underneath our cities, long distance tunnels that would enable people to travel much quicker with much less traffic, make things much smoother. And it seems like when Elon says he's putting less than 1% of his attention to that maybe he's given up on it. The Las Vegas project is moving along. It does appear like they're going to meet their deadlines, but it doesn't seem like they're achieving the speeds that they talked about. And my theory about this, and it's only a theory, is that Elon has realized this is not going to achieve the kind of change he thought. He's making a lot of progress with Tesla. He's making a lot of progress with SpaceX. He's making progress with Neuralink, and he sees those as better uses of his time because they are achieving the revolutionary change he was going for, and the Boring Company maybe isn't there. Another theory is just the Boring Company is running fine without him. It doesn't need his attention. That's a positive spin on it. But to me, that Elon is saying he's not putting a lot of his time into it says this isn't going where we hoped. The other side of that was Elon said he's putting 5% of his brain cycles into Neuralink, which is a lot. Neuralink is a revolutionary company like Tesla, like SpaceX, but really this is striking, and that's what I'm going to devote most of this video to, is how amazing Neuralink is and how that's revealed in the Rogan interview, things that I felt Rogan missed. I love Joe Rogan, but he himself would tell you he's got a monkey brain. Well, Elon would say we all have monkey brains. But sometimes Rogan is just not the smartest guy, and it seemed like he didn't get some key details that Elon was saying. And also seemed like Elon didn't get that Rogan didn't get it. So some things didn't get explained. I want to explain those. I want to cover more.
I originally became a neurosurgeon because I wanted to help people live happier, healthier, longer lives. I've been humbled in practice by how powerless we are to treat many of the most debilitating neurologic diseases. I work with Neuralink because we, for the first time in history, have the potential to solve some of these problems.
Are you testing on people right now?
No, we're not testing on people yet. I think we may be able to implant a Neuralink in less than a year in a person, I think.
Elon talked about putting Neuralink in a human patient within a year. This seems optimistic to me. At the launch event, they said it would happen during 2020.
We are working as hard as we can towards our first in-human clinical study next year.
So it seems like they've already delayed the implantation of a Neuralink in a human until after 2020. If we're talking about a year from early May, we're already into 2021, well into 2021. I certainly hope this is going to move forward quickly, but of course they have to be careful. They have to seek FDA approval. They have to find the right patient. There's a lot of things going on here that might be delaying Neuralink's progress, but it does seem like they're moving forward and we're going to see something good soon.
It's a very low potential for rejection. It's definitely harder when you've got something that is reading and writing neurons. That's generating a current pulse and reading current pulses. That's a little harder.
Joe Rogan asked Elon about the risk of rejection. Now, the idea here is that Neuralink is going to be implanting a device into the skull, opening the skull up and implanting a device that goes into the brain. It is a common concern people are aware of, that when you implant something into the human body, the body might reject the implant. And Elon pretty much dismissed that concern. He said there's some potential for concern, particularly because the implant will be reading and writing to neurons, and that could create issues. This is just a quick description of how it's done.
Take out a chunk of skull, put the Neuralink device in there, stitch it up, and you wouldn't even know that somebody has it.
But our aim is to simplify the procedure, down to the injection of local anesthetic, a very small opening in the skin, a painless opening in the skull below, quick and precise placement of threads into the cortex, and then we fill that hole in the skull with the sensor, allowing the scalp to be closed up. Behind the ear, we'll make a small incision to insert the coil. We will tunnel tiny wires under the scalp to connect the sensors to the coil.
There's more to it, and we're going to cover that shortly. But Rogan, of course, in his fashion of trying to find a way of explaining it to monkey brains, compares it to ice fishing in the next clip.
Okay, so you take this 1-inch diameter, like ice fishing.
Replace that, say, 1-inch diameter piece of skull with this Neuralink device that has a battery and Bluetooth and an inductive charger. You got to insert the electrodes. So the electrodes are very carefully inserted with a robot that we developed.
We developed this robot that can rapidly and precisely insert hundreds of individual threads representing thousands of distinct electrodes into the cortex in less than an hour. This tool allows a surgeon to aim between the blood vessels that cover the surface of the brain with micron scale precision. As you can see, the brain's surface moves with the heartbeat and breathing. The robot tracks and adjusts for this movement. Using this tool, we can greatly reduce the risk of harming cortical vessels and causing bleeding.
Very carefully putting in the electrodes and avoiding any veins or arteries. It doesn't create trauma.
Electrodes be inserted and they will find their way.
Like tiny wires, basically.
Tiny wires.
Tiny wires.
And they'll find their way to specific areas of the brain to stimulate?
No, you literally put them where they're supposed to go.
How long will these wires be?
2 or 3 millimeters.
There's a lot in that segment you just saw. But one thing that really stood out to me is that these wires are going to be only 2 to 3 millimeters long. That's basically 1/10 of an inch or smaller. And that is incredibly small. And I was really surprised by that. I thought, well, isn't the brain a lot bigger than that? Wouldn't you need to go a lot deeper? So I looked it up. And Wikipedia says the cerebral cortex is only 2 to 4 millimeters thick. So it turns out that for most of these threads, they won't have to insert them that far, which is pretty amazing. There's different parts of our brain. And the central part of our brain, as I understand it, and I'm not a neuroscientist, but the central part of our brain is more basic functions. And the cerebral cortex, which is where our thinking supposedly occurs and a lot of higher level processing occurs, it turns out that a lot of that stuff is really close to the edge of our brain, to the skull. So it turns out, fairly easy to reach that with the electrodes that they would be implanting with the Neuralink device. As Elon mentions next, one of the first brain diseases Neuralink hopes to treat is blindness.
So it could be something that returns your eyesight, even if you've lost your optic nerve.
This has been done before in a very limited way with something called the Utah array that allowed a person to be able to actually see something going from pitch black to some kind of vision. But the vision was very limited.
Jason Esterhazen never dreamed he'd see light or movement again, but with the flick of a switch,
wow,
his world suddenly grew brighter.
From being able to see absolutely nothing, it's pitch black, to all of a sudden seeing little flickers of light move around.
The Utah array is much more primitive. The implant is much more likely to cause trauma. It doesn't have as many electrodes to be able to convey anywhere near as rich of a picture to the brain. Neuralink can similarly connect to the visual cortex, which is at the back of the brain. But Neuralink will be able to use far more electrodes to be able to deliver far more complex and rich imagery to the brain, or that is the hope. It will also cause far less trauma because the method of inserting these electrodes into the brain avoids injuring arteries and veins, and at the same time, these wires are flexible, they will last longer. There's so many advantages to this. This is miracle class stuff. Next, Elon talks about fixing paralysis.
It could, in principle, fix almost anything that is wrong with the brain. Restore limb functionality, interface into the motor cortex, and then an implant that's, say, that's like a microcontroller in your muscle groups. You could then create neural shunt that restores somebody who's a quadriplegic to full functionality. Like they can walk around, be normal.
The idea here is that a Neuralink implant operating at the motor cortex would be able to communicate with the muscles and enable the muscles to work again, going around the spinal cord break to be able to reach those muscles and deliver the messages again and feel the signals coming back from the muscles and the nerves around the muscles, so that people who can't walk would be able to walk again. People who can't use their arms would be able to use their arms again. This is, again, miracle level stuff.
Whoa.
Yeah.
So
Maybe slightly better.
Slightly better?
Over time, yes.
You mean with future iterations?
Yeah. Like the, $6 million man.
Gentlemen, we can rebuild him. We have the technology. Better than he was before. Better, stronger, faster.
The Neuralink launch event specifically identified quadriplegia, all four limbs being paralyzed, as the first likely patient that this would be used in.
Our first in-human clinical study next year. And again, these are plans, but the primary indication for that will be complete paralysis by upper cervical spinal cord injury.
And how about epilepsy?
Like severe epilepsy. It's just sort of stop the epilepsy from occurring. Like it could detect it in real time and then fire a counter pulse and stop the epilepsy.
Epilepsy is just one more example where Neuralink could perform miracles. Elon also goes on to talk about how it could help with other brain diseases like Alzheimer's.
At a certain age, we all are going to get Alzheimer's. We're all going to get senile. This would allow you to remember your names of your kids and have a much more normal life where you're able to function much later in life.
And that's something that's very personal to my family because my grandmother had Alzheimer's, my mother has Alzheimer's. Guess what? I'm at high risk for having Alzheimer's. Nothing's going to happen in time for my mother. If you have a family member who already has Alzheimer's, this is probably not going to be developed in time. But if you are at risk for Alzheimer's and it's 10, 20 years down the road before it's going to set in, this could very well change your future and mine. Next, Elon and Joe Rogan get into some depth on how it works.
Yeah.
Stimulating these areas of the brain.
Think of it as like a bunch of circuits, and there's some circuits that are broken, and we can fix those circuits. It's a substitute for those circuits.
Is the process figuring out how much or how little these areas of the brain have to be juiced up?
If you listen carefully, you can see how Rogan misunderstands how it works, and Elon doesn't notice what Rogan doesn't understand. This problem in human communication is really interesting when you think about what's coming later in the video. You'll see. Elon doesn't explain it as well as I've seen him explain it in other cases because he didn't notice what Rogan didn't get. In the interview, Rogan only seems to see the stimulation side. That you're putting something in the brain and this is going to stimulate the brain. That idea is just that you're putting something in the brain and it stimulates or kickstarts the brain, some area that's not working properly. There's an analogy during the interview where they talk about slamming the top of the TV set. In the good old days when we had TVs that worked that way, sometimes the TV would be on the fritz and you'd bang it and suddenly you would have a better picture. I don't know why that worked, but that's a common thing that people of my generation, I'm the same generation as Rogan, that's a common thing we're familiar with, so it sort of makes sense. You can also think of when someone's heart stops, they put the paddles on the chest and they go zzz, and they give it a shock and that gets the heart working again. But that's not what Neuralink is about. The biggest thing about Neuralink is not the signals it's sending into the brain, but that it's reading activity from the neurons. It's reading what's happening inside your brain and allowing you to communicate out. It's what signal you're sending out, not what signal's coming in. It's both, but the signal that you're sending out, or that it's reading from your brain, is actually a bigger change than what's coming in. What Elon is talking about is increasing the input-output bandwidth from our brain to our computers. You've got your phone, and you're using your thumbs or your fingers to get your phone to do something, to choose letters on a screen and create a phrase. That's slow. That's slower than typing on a keyboard if you know how to touch type. Or you talk to the phone and the phone recognizes your voice and, unfortunately, in my experience, doesn't recognize it very efficiently. Now imagine that you're able to communicate with your computer, with your phone, at much higher speed, with much higher precision, and how much better that will be. And we're going to talk about that some more. Next, Rogan heads into the idea of the whole brain implant. And Elon takes it to full AI symbiosis.
The fear is that eventually you're going to have to cut the whole top of someone's head off and put a new top with a whole bunch of wires.
Ultimately, if you want to go with full AI symbiosis, you'll probably want to do something like that.
Symbiosis is a scary word when it comes to AI.
It's optional. AI is getting better and better. Even in a benign scenario, we're kind of left behind. We're just too dumb. So how do you go along for the ride? So if you can't beat them, join them.
I loved how Elon went here. If you can't beat them, join them. Elon sees a world where artificial general intelligence will become far more capable than human intelligence. The computers are going to get smarter than us. They didn't get into this in the interview, but there's this concept of threat versus pet. When artificial general intelligence gets smarter than us, will it view us as a threat? If the computers view us as a threat and they're smarter than us and more capable than us, if we're a threat, they might decide to wipe us out. If they view us as a pet, they might take us along for the ride. They'll let us ride in the passenger seat of the Cybertruck, roll down the window, and stick our heads out to enjoy the breeze. We don't consider dogs or cats to be a threat to humans mostly, other than the occasional bite. We take animals along for the ride as we have expanded human civilization to something far beyond what life was like when we were living back 1,000, 10,000 years ago. So the hopeful scenario is that AI views us as a pet rather than a threat. Elon's take is that by implanting brain-machine interfaces, these Neuralink BMIs in our brain, it will allow us to communicate with the AI at a much higher level, at a much faster speed, and it will allow us to keep up and really be more with it along for the ride. Maybe we can be even more than pets. I highly recommend the Ian Banks series of novels, the Culture series, which Elon Musk has frequently mentioned on Twitter as possibly his greatest influence or his favorite science fiction series. There's a lot in there with a concept called the neural lace, which is very, very similar to what Elon seems to be doing with Neuralink. Rogan brings up the fear that we could become cyborgs as if this is somehow a bad thing, that in merging with the AI, we won't be ourselves anymore. Elon points out that we're already networked with machines. We are addicted to our phones. We use our phones for everything.
We're already a cyborg to some degree, right? Because you've got your phone, you've got your laptop. Today, if you don't bring your phone along, it's like you have missing limb syndrome.
They increase our capability massively. We can access nearly all of human knowledge with our phones in a very short time. Just yesterday, I was helping my kid with Algebra 2, and I was able to ask my phone, what's the sine of 15 degrees, and I got an answer instantly.
It's just that the data rate to the electronics is slow, especially output. Like you're just going with your thumbs. If you can solve the data rate issue, and especially output, but input too, then you can improve the symbiosis that is already occurring between man and machine.
Now imagine how much faster that communication with the computers will be, and how much richer and more full, how much bigger questions you'll be able to ask and get answers quicker when the AI is more capable and when our communication speeds are much faster. And we are going to become much more productive beings. We're going to be much smarter. We're going to be capable of so much more by taking advantage of these opportunities. The biggest problem that Neuralink is trying to address in the long run, in the short run, it's brain diseases. But in the long run, the biggest problem is trying to address our data rate problem. That our output, our ability to communicate with the machines is very limited to maybe 100 characters a minute. Something very, very slow. We just don't type that fast, especially with our thumbs. We don't speak that fast. But our communication with the machines could be much, much faster if we have all these electrodes in our brains allowing our neurons to communicate much more quickly. Elon pointed out specifically that this is about data transfer, and that the output in particular, our communication to the machines, is very slow and needs to be sped up. Next, Joe and Elon start down the road of humans communicating with each other. This gets deep.
You literally could fundamentally change the way human beings interface with each other.
Yes.
Yes.
You wouldn't need to talk. If two people had a Neuralink, you'd be able to effectively have a sort of really high bandwidth telepathy. You could actually communicate at a sort of complex meme structure level. Really have like potentially a new kind of communication. It's sort of a conceptual telepathy, essentially. Let's say you've got some complex idea that you're trying to convey to somebody else. And how do you do that? Well, your brain spends a lot of effort compressing a complex concept into words. And there's a lot of loss, information loss that occurs when compressing a complex concept into words. And then you say those words are then interpreted, then they're decompressed by the person who is listening, and they will at best get a very incomplete understanding of what you're trying to convey. It's very difficult to convey a complex concept with precision because you've got compression, decompression. You may not even have heard all the words correctly, and so communication is difficult. What we have here is a failure to communicate.
There's a lot here. Elon is saying not only will we be able to communicate with machines, we'll be able to communicate with other humans who also have a Neuralink device implanted without having to talk. And this blows Rogan away.
You would be able to communicate very quickly and with far more precision.
As Elon describes it, our intrahuman communication from me to you, when we both have Neuralink devices, will be greatly improved. Currently, I have a thought in my head. I want to explain it to you. I translate that thought in my head into words, in my case in the English language. Sometimes I try Spanish, Japanese, or French, but mostly English. I then say those words. You hear those words. Your mind then interprets the words that you heard and converts that to an idea in your head. The idea I had in my head when I started to talk and the idea that you have in your head after you've heard it could be very different. There's a lot of problems along the way. Did I choose the right words? Did I say them correctly? Did you hear them correctly? Did you interpret them correctly? And more. And then there's the speed of communication, which is very slow. With us both having Neuralinks, if you buy into the theory, we will be able to communicate much more quickly with each other, much more efficiently, and much more precisely. So you will understand what I'm saying. I will be able to say bigger concepts to you, and you will understand them better with Neuralink and Neuralink. I'm not sold on how exactly that works. There's some idea that it still has to be communicated to some language. Hopefully that communication to the language is more efficient. The speed of transmission is more efficient. The transmission is more accurate between me and you, and your interpretation of the language is more accurate. But I'm not completely sold on that idea yet. I like it, I'm just not sure.
How many years before you don't have to talk?
If the development continues to accelerate 5 years, 5 to 10 years?
That's quick.
10 years more like it.
Of course, in his usual optimistic Elon time, Elon says this is going to happen in 5 to 10 years, this intrahuman communication speed increase. But next, Elon goes really big. Save state.
You could also save state. And
save state?
Save state, like save your brain state, like a saved game in a video game. You could save state and restore that state into a biological being if you wanted to in the future. In principle, there's like nothing like from a physics standpoint that prevents this.
Like a saved game in a video game, this really goes back to this concept of neural lace from the Ian Banks novels. It's really amazing stuff. And you could say, oh, this is just science fiction. But we used to say that about landing rockets, and we used to say that about cars that drive themselves. We used to say it about speaking to each other by video. I mean, even just this fact that I'm broadcasting this video through YouTube is pretty much science fiction 30 years ago. So where are we going to be in 20 or 30 years? It's science fiction until it isn't fiction anymore. It's coming.
And restore that state into a biological being if you wanted to.
You can put your mind into another biological being. Again, something that appeared somehow in the Ian Banks novels. This is so out there, it's hard for people to grasp. Think of it this way. You back up your computer regularly. If your computer crashes, fails, breaks, whatever, and you have to go get a new computer, you take the backup and you put that backup onto the new computer. Well, if you back up your brain, your mental state, you use a Neuralink device that's a whole brain Neuralink device, and you're able to capture the entire state of your mind at one moment, and then you die in a car crash the next day, your mind that has been saved could be put into another entity. Whether it's awake on a computer, whether it's put into somehow a created biological being or an android robot. I'm not sure where that's going, and Elon didn't really explain it. I'm not sure he even knows where he's going with that. It sounds crazy, but we do it with backing up computers now. Is it possible that we could back up our mental state? Elon goes on to discuss how much different the new you would be, the backed up you put into a biological being or wherever, how much different that would be. And he doesn't think it's that different.
Now, you'd be a little different, but then you're also a little different when you wake up in the morning from yesterday, and you're a little different. In fact, if you say like you 5 years ago versus you today, it's quite a big difference.
Yes.
So you'd be substantially you. I mean, you'd certainly think you're you.
This conceptual notion of how you might be different from the person you were yesterday or the person you were 5 years ago, that's difficult for the human brain to comprehend. I'm a real early adopter, technophile, I love this stuff, and I'm still like, wow, that's a pretty big leap. Although maybe if we have a Neuralink, it'll be easier for us to understand this stuff because it'll make us smarter.
Think like how your phone you can record videos on your phone. Mm-hmm. Like there's no way you could remember a video as accurately as your phone or a camera could. Far in the future, you could recall everything, just like it's a movie.
Crystal clear.
Including the entire sensory experience,
emotions, everything,
and play it back.
Do you think you'll be able to share?
You can edit it.
Elon went all Black Mirror in that segment. I saw this Black Mirror episode. This is just a short clip from it.
Really hope to look forward to seeing you again. Liam, we really hope to look forward to seeing you again.
Elon went even further and suggested you could edit your memories. What? This is crazy stuff. Next, he briefly goes into the brains in vats concept that's been around for a long time with philosophers. It dates back, if you've seen The Matrix is kind of a brains in vats scenario. It really dates back at least to the allegory of the cave by Plato in ancient Greece.
How do you know you're not a brain in a vat? You are a brain in a vat. Then that vat is your skull.
Yes.
And everything you see, feel, hear, everything, all your senses are electrical signals. Everything.
And then Elon addresses Rogan's misguided question about equality.
But the people that first get it should have a massive advantage over people that don't have it yet.
Well, I mean, it's the kind of thing where your productivity would improve, I don't know, dramatically, maybe by a factor of 10 with it. So you could definitely just take out a loan and do it and earn the money back real fast.
A few points there. The equality question is misleading. You can finance the upgrade. You can make a lot more money now because you're a lot smarter. You increase your productivity and you're able to earn a lot more money and pay back the loan for putting this device in. Rogan did not seem to get this point. The other big point is that the differences between people will become trivial. If I get this implant and I'm 10 times smarter than you, okay, that may seem unfair, but artificial intelligence may become 100 times as smart as us, 1,000 times as smart as us, 1,000,000 times as smart as us.
We should be, I think, less concerned about like relative capabilities between people and more having AI be vastly, beyond us and decoupled from human will.
The bigger jump, the bigger concern is AI getting smarter than us, not some people being smarter than others. We already have that to some extent. It's not clear how much that change will matter in human relations, and it should be widely available to all humans.
So you feel like it's inevitable, like AI, sentient AI.
Supersentient AI, yeah. Like beyond a level that's difficult to understand.
And
impossible to understand, probably.
Supersentient AI is inevitable if you listen to Elon. Supersentient AI that is smarter than us, that is more conscious than us. It will surpass us by so much that we won't be able to understand how much it has surpassed us. There's this blogger, the Wait But Why blog, done by Tim Urban. He did this piece on how artificial intelligence and artificial and general intelligence will improve rapidly, exponentially. Imagine AGI at first is as smart as an ant. A year later, it's as smart as a mouse. 6 months later, it's as smart as a monkey. 2 months later, it's approaching human-level intelligence. The day after it reaches human-level intelligence, it's smarter than us. And not long after that, it's a lot smarter than us, and the gap is going to grow rapidly. It is increasing exponentially. Not only is it increasing fast, it's over time, that speed is going up. It's getting faster and faster and faster. A month after AI is smarter than us, it looks at us like we're chimps. We're just not on its level anymore. 2 months later, it looks at us like we're mice. A week after that, we're ants. And not long after that, it doesn't even notice we're there. The big scary moment is the moment shortly after it passes human-level intelligence. That's when it might view us as a threat. Once it gets to we're chimpanzees, we're mice, we're not a threat anymore. It doesn't worry about us anymore. Next up, artificial intelligence as a tertiary layer.
So you can think of the computer, the AI, as like a third layer, a tertiary layer. Like that could be symbiotic with the cortex. It would be much smarter than the cortex. But you essentially have 3 layers. And you actually have that right now. Your phone is capable of things, and your computer is capable of things that your brain is definitely not. Storing terabytes of information perfectly, doing incredible calculations that we couldn't even come close to doing. You have that with your computer. It's just like I said, the data rate is slow. The connection is weak.
We already have a tertiary layer. Go back 30 years. If you wanted access to more information than you had in your brain, you'd go to a library, you'd read a book. It took a lot of time to get answers. Today you have access to most of the world's information in real time through your phone or your computer. Your phone can calculate for you. We are already networked with the machines, but our data rate is slow.
You are already sort of a cybernetic symbiote. It's just a question of your data rate. The communication speed between your phone and your brain is slow.
Now imagine you can get all those answers without having to type or speak into your phone. With Neuralink, you'll be able to think the question, and you'll be able to ask more complex questions and get more complete answers instantly. And then Joe Rogan asks the big question.
What are we going to be?
Like when?
25 years from now. What are we going to be?
There could be a whole brain interface.
A whole brain interface.
Something pretty close to that, yeah.
How do you define, what do you mean by whole brain interface?
Almost all the neurons are connected to the sort of AI extension of yourself.
AI extension of yourself?
Yeah.
What does that mean to you? Like when you say AI extension of yourself?
Well, like I said, you already have a computer extension of yourself in your phone. And now online, it's like somebody dies, there's like an online ghost that their online stuff is still alive. It would just be that more of you would be in the cloud, I guess, than in your body.
That's it. 25 years from now, more of you will be in the cloud than in your body. The possibilities from there are amazing. What if you could make multiple copies of yourself? You could put your mind into a robot, a humanoid robot, a dog robot, a cheetah robot, a flying robot, a swimming robot, a spacefaring robot? I want to close this video by leaving you with some really good clips from the Neuralink launch event. There's a brief bit with the president of the company talking about working with Elon, and then there's a longer bit that's brilliant. There's a fantastic discussion about when they implant these electrodes into the brain, about the ratio of the number of neurons that each electrode can work with. Brilliant discussion. Rather than me talking about it, I'm just going to let you watch it.
Elon has this incredible optimism where he'll pierce through these imagined constraints and show you that really a lot more is possible than you really think is today. And you have to be very careful telling him that something's impossible. It better be limited by a law of physics or you're going to end up looking stupid.
What's the ratio of electrodes to neurons? Because you wouldn't want a 1-to-1 ratio because that's a lot of electrodes. So you really want to actually have that ratio be as big as possible, and ideally at least 100-to-1, maybe 1,000-to-1, ideally. So because the bigger the ratio of neurons to electrodes, the fewer implantations. It's going to be just way better. So for sure, you'd want to read a whole bunch of neurons and then be able to stimulate neurons or a cluster of neurons by varying the field potential, so that you don't need to have a 1-to-1 stim or read ratio. Ideally, 100-to-1. You guys want to add?
Yeah. I guess I would
or more. Yeah.
I think it's important to add to that any answer we give to what's the right number of electrodes at this point is speculation.
Yeah.
That's part of the. I mean,
speculate.
But the point I'm trying to make though is that this bootstrapping that we anticipate is going to happen. We're going to put in devices, they're going to be lower level. From that, we'll be able to find out the information content and information density in the areas that we're looking at with the electrodes we have. And we'll be able to bootstrap up from that. So, I actually believe that we are the ones that are going to be able to answer that question without speculation.
And I'll say, when you look at the anatomy of the brain is mostly silent. On average, a classic electrode can see somewhere between 0 and 4 neurons electrically by different waveform templates. But when you just look at the anatomy and the distances, you'd expect it to see more like 1,000. And so this question of why is the brain so silent is an interesting one. And one of the hypotheses is that there are a lot of neurons that have very narrow receptive fields that only fire when they have very high information content updates with respect to something specific. And one of the challenges with spike sorting is that you can't tell you can't tell apart another spike of a neuron that you think you're recording from with, that was the first time I heard from that neuron specifically that I don't know is there, right? And as you have these long-lasting chronic devices, you'll be able to get more of that out in the decoding.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to vary. The electrode to neuron density is going to vary quite a bit depending upon what part of the brain it is as well. If it's sort of somatosensory is probably a pretty big ratio. You can get pretty impressive results controlling essentially a cursor with your brain. You don't need very many electrodes for that. So, and there's a lot of neurons in the sort of motor cortex. So I think there's some cases where you could have, I don't know, this is really speculation, of course. I mean, some places where you could have maybe 10,000-to-1, and some places where you'd want maybe 10-to-1. It could probably, I suspect it will vary quite a bit.